Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 20 of Outlaw Star. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, Gene and the crew were sort of strong-armed into helping a security service with space and pirates and all that. Initially they were detained as being suspicious, if not pirates themselves. But then once things started rocketing fanwards and the station was attacked by seemingly a civilian vessel, Gene not only leapt into action, but also sort of gained the admiration of some of the officers who were otherwise poorly disposed towards him. And given how the opening monologue of this episode's going, it seems like it's going to be a Jim episode. And I do believe, if memory serves, that this was kind of like a romantic episode almost, which, you know, it's a decent change of pace from what Outlaw Star normally delivers. So, I don't know, we'll see how it goes. You know, I've just been thinking about this episode, and I seem to recall that the plot is something to the effect of, like, Jim gets involved with a girl and sort of goes out of his way or otherwise goes against the interests of the rest of the Outlaw Star to defend her. And that's an interesting plot in and of itself when you get down to it, because really, as far as the crew goes, you can sort of divide them up between, like, stable and unstable personalities, with Jim being perhaps the most stable of all the stable people. So that's why it's naturally kind of interesting where he just sort of, like, does his own thing in a way that's far more chaotic than normal. Oh dear. So I feel like Jim's pushing buttons here, you know? Because, like, Aisha's talking about him as though he's a kid, which, you know, he is in a sense, but I feel like when you're aboard the Outlaw Star, traveling through space, doing all this stuff, you know, you can't really be considered a kid just because there are responsibilities and other things that you have to just do when you're on, like, a ship that's crewed by 5 people. Now, I guess before we can really get anything on Jim and his predicament, a ship is approaching, potentially with malicious intent. You know, it sort of remains to be seen, but, like, the big thing here is that the ship's approach was only caught kind of late in the game, which is really not a good thing. You know, like, if you're doing stuff in space or out on sea or stuff like that, like, you want to have good scanners and sensors that can read stuff out at a distance. And, you know, if you don't have that, that's a real quick way to get surprised terminally. Because, you know, a boat is one thing, you know, like a rupture in the hull of a boat, like you can survive that even if the boat does indeed capsize. But if a spaceship ruptures the hull, like that's it. Like you're getting vented out into space, and that's no fun for anyone. All this to say, like, it'd be really cool if, like, the sensors could pick up, like, incoming torpedoes or what have you. But that it failed to notice this ship is, not good. And, you know, if that weren't enough, it seems like this ship is, kind of a novel thing. You know, it's, it almost reminds me of, like, Getter Robo or something like that. You know, a ship that's comprised of multiple parts that can be controlled independently but combined together. And interestingly, separating seems to be the more efficacious thing, because in Getter Robo, the idea is that the three Getter machines combine to make a whole greater than the sum of its parts. But when you're doing grappler ship combat here, if the grappler arms can break off and start doing their own thing independently, then, you know, Jean has to worry about 3 people rather than just 1. You know, it's a lot more balls to juggle, far more dangerous, to the point where, like, they're just sort of cutting and running. You know, I can hardly blame him for doing something like that, because, you know, if there's this big fight that you're not winning, sometimes the right thing to do is to just get out of Dodge. Naturally, Aisha's none too happy about this, being a Katarl, but, like, I feel like someone's just gonna have to explain to her. It's like, it's either we run away and you're a little upset about it, or we are drifting through the vacuum of space, dead. And, you know, that's not something anyone really wants, you know? Okay, so it seems like Jim's just, getting on people's nerves. You know, first Aisha, now Jean. I feel like both Melfina and Suzuka are a bit more even-headed about things. So, like, if Jim were to get under their skin, he'd really have to try something, you know? Okay. So Suzuka is not accompanying the group, tellingly. You know, it seems to me that whenever characters just sort of like leave and do their own thing, it's because they would sort of be in a position to resolve the plot. And, you know, seeing as how those two are the sort of 2 most recent additions to the team, and Jean and Jim are making snide remarks about them not being team players and all that, I feel like teamwork is gonna kind of be the key here. And perhaps tellingly, every time Jean makes a snide remark about them not being team players, Jim makes a snide remark about Jean himself not being much of a team player. And to be fair, you know, when you're the captain of a ship, like, you're in charge. You don't strictly have to be a team player. But at the same time, you know, you should take into account the wants and needs of your crew, lest you find yourself at the business end of a mutiny. Oh dear. So, it seems as though Jim's concerns will not be addressed here. Jean is deciding to go out and, you know, drink and cause problems, and interestingly, Jim has sicked Melfina on him. Not because she's, like, prone to keep him from causing trouble, but, well, actually because she is. Not through any active measure, but because she's presumably kind of a stick in the mud. Now, oddly enough, this leaves Jim alone, and therefore absolutely ripe to get into trouble. You know, he's sort of going through this, almost a stereotypical thing where he's complaining about, like, all the work that gets foisted upon him. So naturally, this is a prime setup for him to, just think of himself, you know. Now, it seems to me that with Jim being the only one aboard the ship in a meaningful way, I get the feeling any antagonist is probably going to try and, like, board the ship. It wouldn't be remarkably surprising. Oh, never mind then. So I guess Jim's just leaving the ship now after working a lot. I mean, I can't say I relate to his predicament, because when I'm really, really tired, I just kind of go to bed. And in my mind, there is very little in the way of work that's so important that I have to, stay up to the point of, like, having to prop my eyelids open so I don't fall asleep. That fresh air certainly did him a lot of good if he's, like, able to be awake and, like, take interest in stray cats. Now the question is, are these truly Catarl agents in disguise? It'd be a neat little trick, I suppose, even though I don't think they can necessarily transform like that. Yeah, for someone who is exhausted and with a lot of work to do, he's far more concerned about chasing down those cats than he is about doing any of the stuff he previously had been doing. And, perhaps because he's so tired and in like a sleep-deprived stupor here, this girl in the fountain is, in his mind, exceptionally beautiful. Now, there is certainly something graceful about what she's doing. It seems to me to be some type of martial arts, but I don't know. I don't reckon that Jim has much of an appreciation for that sort of thing, other than however it's used to defend him. So Jim seems to be hitting it off with this girl in like a sort of awkward, childlike kind of way. It's kind of to be expected, like, unfortunately, to get good with women and all that stuff, you just sort of have to, like, learn how through trial and error. There's no real way besides that. The interesting thing is that, this girl here, Hanmyo, she's just sort of, traveling, which raises a couple questions, because I feel like ordinary space travelers aren't necessarily something, if that makes sense. Like, people don't just like wander around. I feel like people only travel through space when they have a definite destination, and the fact that she doesn't have one, or rather is kind of discreet about what she's doing, that seems a little bit suspicious in my mind. This isn't to say that she is one of the space pirates or is necessarily affiliated with them, but, it could be. I feel like between the martial arts she was practicing, the fact that she has a couple of cats she can tend to, and that sort of like that armored chest plate she was wearing, like, there's something going on here. Now, speaking of something going on here, unfortunately, Gene managed to drink in spite of Melfina, much to his detriment. Man, it's one of those things where, like, I feel like once you drink to a certain point, like, it should really lose any luster to it. I've had days where after drinking a whole lot, I think to myself, boy, I'm never doing that again. And while it's not strictly true that I never do it again, I never do it quite to the same degree of excess, Like, you can only take so many absolutely splitting headaches. Ooh, okay, so we have some more tension now. Gene is a bit unhappy about having to do all the legwork here fixing the ship, but, what he doesn't realize is that Jim was like crunching the numbers and doing all that. It's not manual labor or anything, but like, it is a lot of work. It's a lot of responsibility on his shoulders as well. Crunching numbers ain't nothing. Oh dear. So, Gene being a little condescending about Jim's impending date probably isn't the right approach here. Unfortunately, it seems as though both have taken the entirely wrong approach here, and maybe they could benefit from just, like, taking a step back and looking at things from 30,000 feet before immediately devolving into insults and stuff like that. So if nothing else, Jim's kind of doing the right thing of his own accord, bringing flowers and all that. I mean, it certainly seems to have won him some brownie points, Although, with someone who has claimed to be traveling through space, I don't know where exactly she's gonna put him, Like, the spaceships we see in Outlaw Star, they're not exactly super lived in, if that makes any sense. In stuff like Cowboy Bebop, we see, like, there being living quarters and things like that. And naturally, there are some too in Outlaw Star, but they don't seem to be, I guess, luxurious is the word I'm looking for. They're highly utilitarian, which of course makes sense. There being limited room on a spaceship. But if you take something like Star Trek The Next Generation, spaceships in that have, like, carpeting and warm lighting and other things that you would expect to find in a home rather than in a space vessel. Alright, so the plot's thickening a little bit with that message from Fred, It really seems that guy never portends anything good, which is unfortunate because he has a cool name. And I feel like the juxtaposition between that little coded message and then the girl Jim's hanging out with, like, that probably doesn't bode remarkably well. Lest we forget, there are still a bunch of assassins after Jean. And, maybe the girl herself isn't an assassin, but suppose she's bait. Or maybe an apprentice, or oh dear. Well, yeah, there we have it. I feel like the cut between her and the ship was one thing, but it's just proven at this point. She was in the ship and her two cats are helping out. Oh dear. So whether or not the thing she's doing with Jim is real affection or just designed to get under his skin, like, it's not good, There's really only one way this can turn out, and it's not going to be good. The only question is whether or not anyone learns the truth here. Because really, there are sort of three possibilities. Jim learns the truth alone, and he's sad, and, like, he can't really share it with anyone. Alternately, Jean and Jim learn the truth, and Jean takes the opportunity to comfort the poor lad, because this is, a bit of a rough thing to have to deal with. Alternately, Jean and Jean alone learns about this, and, like, he makes the uncomfortable decision of keeping the truth away from Jim, just because it would be needlessly painful. And really, no matter which one of those you pick, it's gonna hurt a fair bit, It's not gonna be a good thing. Now it's, oh dear. That's a deeply unfortunate phrase. So, Gene, thinking that, like, maybe he better make things up to Jim, he's sort of deferring to him on how to deal with this ship. And Jim simply says there's more than one way to skin a cat, little realizing just how correct he is. I mean, at least there's, like, a little bit of levity with Eijitan Clan, not really enjoying that particular turn of phrase, but, man. So, it seems as though Jim has devised a plan. The question is whether or not it's going to work. Gene is of the opinion that, like, whatever they did last time didn't work, so they're going to have to do something new this time. Oh, are they dividing up the controls then? That's actually very interesting. It really sort of ties in everything about this episode together, with Gene deferring to Jim, and Suzuka and Eijitan Clan sort of pulling their weight on the team. Yeah, I hate to say it, but just from a perspective of like brain volume and surface area, like Aisha, Clan Clan, and Suzaku are probably better equipped to pilot a grappler ship than a bunch of cats are, even though they seemingly do have like a neural interface. Because that's one of those sci-fi things where it's like, if you can interface with a machine at the speed at which you think, like that's beneficial for you. But at the same time, if you're not very good at thinking, it's not gonna help you all that much. Yeah, so already they've destroyed one part of the ship, which, we understand to mean the death of one of the cats. And, wow, in a weird sort of way, I can't help but be reminded of Cowboy Bebop with, the sort of the harmonica music playing in the background and the space combat. I wonder if that's a deliberate thing, because there were a fair few segments in Cowboy Bebop where something melancholy and sad happens to harmonica music playing in the background. Man. It's almost like this whole thing is unnecessarily brutal, with the Outlaw Star pummeling the ship rather than, strictly grappling it. Wow, that's rather grim. So they destroyed the ship, it went up in a big conflagration, but just seeing how they battered the ship like that, it seems almost excessive to me. I feel like, you didn't necessarily have to do that. So poor Jim, the guy doesn't know, like, Gene's even asking him, like, what are you so happy about? Naturally, he has a date, or, he assumes he has one, but, darn. Unfortunately, there's no real good lesson you can glean from this, because he doesn't know the truth of the matter. Sure, this girl just sort of, like, came into his life and said, hey, this must be fate and all that, but, I don't know. Like, any lesson you can extrapolate from this isn't necessarily the one that maps onto reality, if that makes sense. Because, yeah, it might be fate that she came into your life and fate that she left, but that's just not the full truth of the matter, Oh, dear. That's gotta be a real kick in the teeth for Jim, saying that, like, I wish I could be like you without concerns. And Aisha says, well, I have plenty of concerns. Sometimes I get hungry. If the biggest problem in your life is that, like, you get a little hungry sometimes, I'd say life is pretty darn good. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.